Folks, this video is going to encompass several subjects, but I'm going to start with these black pastors who need to keep their mouths shut and their heads down, but for whatever reason, when they get in front of cameras, all they know how to do is run their mouths and make up alternative facts. Translation, lie. 2 days ago, Donald Trump had a quote-unquote meeting with black leaders, which in actuality was a meeting that he held on the first day of Black History Month to basically trumpet his embrace of the black community. Well, number one, that was a lie, because all the people that were showcased at that meeting were all Trump supporters of some form or fashion. There were no actual black leaders at that meeting. Now, included in that number was Pastor Darryl Scott, who decided to run his mouth regarding Chicago violence and how, quote unquote, these gang leaders had reached out to him and indicated that they were in support of President Trump and that they would want to reduce the violence in Chicago if some federal monies, programs, whatever, social programs were placed in the Chicago area. Now, when I heard Mr. Scott make those claims, the first thing that came to mind was, number one, who would reach out to a pastor based in Cleveland about a problem going on in Chicago where there are so many other reputable religious leaders and community leaders that they could have reached out to, who would in turn have contacted Mr. Trump? That was number one. Number two, Darryl Scott, Mr. Cocaine Sniffin Scott, has a history of making statements that are absolutely untrue. This was another instance of that occurring. It didn't take long for Mr. Scott to walk back his comments to the point that he basically said that it didn't happen. Now, this particular segment on the Roland Martin Show is going to highlight the alternate fact society that Donald Trump lives in. And there are very few people who absolutely use the facts in order to back up legitimate positions. It just doesn't happen. Here's the clip from Mr. Scott's walk back and Roland Martin's panel discussing it.
From us, about 4 hours away in Cleveland, Pastor Darryl Scott, well, he is walking back some comments that he made to Donald Trump when he met with a group of black Republicans on the first day of Black History Month, where he said the gang leaders in Chicago respected Trump and wanted to work with Trump to end violence there. Really, this is what he said the other day.
I was recently contacted by some of the top gang thugs in Chicago for a sit-down. They reached out to me because they associated me with you. They respect you. They believe in what you're doing, and they want to have a sit-down about lowering that body count.
Now, the first problem I had with this was he called them gang thugs. if Darryl Scott ever happens to cruise his way into Chicago and those quote unquote gang thugs get wind of it, he's going to be on the endangered species list just by calling them gang thugs. He could have called them gang members. You could have called them gang anything else. But when he threw that thugs in there, that put him on an endangered list. But anyway, let's continue.
So in a couple of weeks, we're going in Chicago.
That's a great idea because Chicago is totally out of control.
Well, I let them know, I said, we got to lower that body count. We don't want to talk about anything else, get that body count down. And they agreed that the principals, they can do it. These are guys straight from the streets, no politicians, straight street guys. But they're going to commit that if they lower that body count, we'll come in and we'll do some social programs.
All right, now, he did say that he's going into Chicago in a couple of weeks. I ask anybody, and I ask everybody to share this video, especially with people from the Chicago area. But share this as much as you can. I want a follow-up in 30 days, which is more than a couple of weeks. I want a follow-up to see if Darryl Scott, in fact, goes into Chicago. Because I am telling you right now, he was lying. And if he carries his black ass into Chicago, and there is any publicity or notoriety to the fact that he's in Chicago, you're going to see some issues. So I hope he's got a significant number of protection personnel assigned to him if, in fact, he thinks about leaving Ohio for the Chicago area, because stuff is absolutely going to happen. Him and that overweight cocaine sniffing wife of his as well. And yeah, both of them are on record as being heavy cocaine users in the recent past, both of which claim now that they no longer partake. But yeah, I ain't buying that one either. But let me play the rest of the clip.
Now, just a few hours later, Trump was talking to, Pastor Darryl Scott was talking to a Chicago TV station, and he said this.
So there are no gang leaders offering to reduce the body count in exchange for federal funds?
No, I mean, come on now. No.
So basically, when he was at that photo op at the White House, he straight out lied. And he admitted the lie the next day.
Okay, so exactly what is Pastor Darryl Scott talking about? Well, let's go to Chicago. Pastor Michael Flager joins us, of course, St. Sabina Catholic Church there. Pastor Father Flager, how you doing?
Good morning, Ron. How you doing?
Okay, so you have been in Chicago for a very long time. You've been in those very streets, dealing with gang leaders there, dealing with others as well. And so I find it interesting that gang leaders allegedly in Chicago will be reaching out to Pastor Darryl Scott. Have you heard anything like this?
First of all, I've never heard of Darryl Scott. You know, like you started off the show, Roland, this keeps getting more bizarre. This Trump America is creating an atmosphere of alternative facts. He started out with a statement at the White House at the Black History celebration, and then backs up one after the other. First he said, now they were former gang leaders. Then he would say, no, it was only one. And now he's saying they're not supporters of Trump. In other words, the whole thing, his whole conversation was bizarre. It was just a made-up lie. And this seems to be now the norm of the day of what's going on in the White House.
Well, and again, he says to President Trump, other folks around the table, networks were carrying these comments live, that they said that they will help to reduce, quote, reduce the body count, again, with the promise of social programs coming to the city. Now, he said something different, and so here's the issue here. It comes to a question of credibility. He said he's going to come to Chicago in 2 weeks. Has he talked to you? Has he talked to Reverend James Meeks? Has he talked to Pastor Charles Jenkins? Has he talked to any other faith leaders in Chicago who've been on the front lines in the city trying to deal with this issue?
No, and here's the thing that nobody knows of, nobody's heard about him, and are we really supposed to believe that? First of all, he said he talked to the gang leaders in Chicago. Well, that means he had to talk to about 700 different people because there's factions all over the city of Chicago. There is no gang leaders. This is not 30 years ago. This is 2017. But with all the folks here, we got, like you say, we got Meeks, we got Jenkins, we got Black Star Project, we got Nation of Islam, we got Rainbow Push, we got all these possibilities, and they reached out to somebody in Ohio. I mean, you're really supposed to believe this? And then they're going to barter. And first of all, saying, well, we're going to lower the body count. That's an interesting concept all by itself. But then come back and say for social services. And the thing that obviously this pastor does not understand, that we don't need just social services. We need jobs, economic development. We need good schools. We need some help for people coming back from incarceration. We need some real things. This is too damn serious to him playing a game of his 15 minutes of fame at the White House.
Christopher Millett joins us, Executive Director of the Chicago Violence Reduction Strategy. Christopher, welcome to TV1.
Me this morning.
So again, Christopher, your thoughts about what Pastor Darryl Scott said. Do you know anything about this? Have you heard any of this? And also explain to our audience the point that Father Flager just made. I spent 6 years living in Chicago. It is not a fractured city. You no longer have the level of control you used to do with gangs there. I talked to Pastor Charles Jenkins, who sat down with many gang leaders 2 or 3 years ago, and they said, we don't know who's driving this because it's not the way it used to be in the city.
Right. There are over, like Father Flager said, there's over 650 gang factions in the city of Chicago right now. Over 100,000 known gang members in the city. You know, you look at that and you combine it with the proliferation of guns in the city and some of the other things that are going on. To sit down, the idea that you're going to sit down with a handful of leaders makes sense. It makes sense if you're in a community or in one police district. But to think that there's no set group of leaders that are running the entire city on the streets of Chicago, that's just not the reality right now. I do think that if you look at what the pastor said in Ohio, you know, similar to what Father Flager said, you know, the concern is, you know, who have you talked to? You talk to one person who's a former gang member and you have a solution. This is something, people have been working at this. People in Chicago are not sitting on their hands. The faith-based community, the legal community, the law enforcement community, the social service community are consistently working at this. You know, I wonder what it would look like last year in 2016 if so many people weren't working on it. You know, I think there's a level of reality of understanding the different dynamics in the city that contribute to the violence. Not just policing. Policing is part of it, but if you look at the education, if you look at the closing of schools, if you look at the closing of mental health institutions, if you look at the closing of social service agencies. There's a lot of things, and they're all in the same neighborhoods where you're seeing the spikes in violence.
Father Flager, I was in Charleston, South Carolina yesterday speaking at a school choice event there for South Carolina Can. Tim King of Urban Prep, of course, was there on the panel, and he said that 50% of the murders in Chicago are happening in literally 3 neighborhoods. And so when you hear this talk about all the so-called the carnage in Chicago, to your point, if you only have a law enforcement solution, or if you only have a after-school basketball program solution, you're not getting at the heart of the fundamental problem when it comes to violence in Chicago.
No, not at all, Ron. That's absolutely true. And the fact of the matter is, you look at those 3 neighborhoods or those 15 communities out of the 77 in Chicago where you have a lot of violence coming out of, what you realize, the same communities have a consistent threat. It's underfunded, underperforming schools. It's abandoned buildings, foreclosure. It's lack of jobs. When they say in America now it's 4.6% of unemployment. Well, in my neighborhood, it tells me I'm not in America. We're at 28 to 34% unemployment. So there are some serious issues and some serious needs that need to be taken care of with that. But again, with just changing the minds of young people is one thing, but you have to have something for them to do with some options. We started a program back here in July of 50 at-risk youth that people said were sure to be locked up or were going to be dead. Well, here we are at the beginning of February now. Of those 50, 33 of them are now working full-time. These were shooters on the street with felonies, ankle bracelets. Now they're working because they were given options. This is a serious problem. That's why for somebody like this Darryl Scott or anybody else to trivialize this thing is absolutely unacceptable. These are real people. This is real blood in our streets.
Christopher, last question for you. If you got an opportunity to sit across from Trump or his team, what would you tell him Chicago needs?
Well, I think first I would advise to look at what's already going on in Chicago, look at the federal work that's happening and the federal partnerships that are happening. And I would say, you know, anytime you're going to engage in something like this, you do your reconnaissance, you know, find out, you know, survey the battlefield, prepare the battlefield, and then engage. You don't just jump in and engage. See who's out here. See what Father Flager's doing. See what other folks are doing in the community. See what the outreach agencies are doing. Ask them what they see as the challenges for people who are on the ground, and then begin the support. And I think the support is, you know, it's not necessarily in the form of tanks and rifles and guns on the street. You know, how about support in terms of outreach and support? And see, again, but supporting the folks who are out here working, doing the work. This is a monumental challenge, but it's one that's taken decades to get to. And to think that we're going to get out of this in an evening or a day is not realistic, in my opinion.
Christopher Millett, Father Michael Flager, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Folks, let's bring in our panel here. We have Dr. Greg Carr, Chair of Afro-American Studies, Howard University, Dr. Julian Malveaux, economist, President Emerita of Burnett College, also Cleo Monago, behavioral health expert, and also Steve Monasteri, former chair of the Texas Republican Party. I want to go to you first, Cleo Monago. Look, you've been dealing with these issues before, working with law enforcement on the West Coast. And as Father Michael Flager said, Reverend Jackson has said this for constantly, even out of Baltimore. He said, look, don't just simply send in the Attorney General or the head of the FBI in Baltimore. Bring in the Secretary of HUD. Bring in the Secretary of Commerce. Bring in the Secretary of Treasury. He said, bring in the Secretary of Education. To deal with violence in the cities, you must deal with economics. You must deal with education.
That's great advice, what you just said, Roland. But see, the issue here is that we know who Darryl Scott is because of Trump. The man has no credibility. He doesn't know anything about these issues. He was talking and hustling, frankly, at the Trump meeting, trying to be relevant and making up stuff to be impressive in front of the interesting president of the United States. And this has nothing to do with what's best for the community. We don't know this man. And what Mr. Millett just recommended, as well as what you're saying, is all rational things that people would consider if they were really serious about changing these issues. I mean, the president, let alone his team, don't know nothing about transforming that behavior in the streets of Chicago. They're just running their mouths, and he even had that meeting, from my perspective, to be relevant, to look like he cares about black people, and it was just a token moment before he got back to being white. So, you know.
Julian Malveaux, Julian, as an economist, again, this comes down to money, 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 economics, 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 opportunity, opportunity, opportunity.
Absolutely. In the wake of the Freddie Gray uprisings in Baltimore, many people recommended that a team from almost every federal department, modeling what Dr. King attempted to do with the Poor People's Campaign, to make sure that we looked at intervention from a interdisciplinary perspective, not just to say send in the cops, but you want to send in education. But of course, here's a challenge here. We have a Secretary of Education who does not understand education. We have a Secretary of Commerce who does not understand commerce. We have a Secretary, imagine bringing Ben Carson into the hood in Chicago. He'd be jogging his way back out of there. I mean, this was basically, on the first day of Black History Month, a slap in the face to every black person, to imply that he thought that Frederick Douglass was still alive, doing great things that need to be recognized. I mean, you know, this man needs to be locked into the African American Museum overnight with his whole cabinet, and just let them wander, let the souls of enslaved people capture them. But you know, what we know here is that that meeting was nothing but a wink and a nod, and we know that Darryl Scott is a charlatan who needs to have his
Steve.
behind beat, and his wife is crazy. She kept saying she loved Trump.
I got it. Steve, no, because hold up. So Steve Monastery, at the end of the day, first of all, Donald Trump built a massive tower in Chicago. He was doing business there. He didn't do anything about this issue or even attempt to do anything while he was building his tower there. And so he could have done something in Chicago before going to the Oval Office. So what credibility does he even have on this subject?
I'm sorry, Roland. Steve is okay for some issues, but you should have had is a black issue. So where is Paris Denard and that other head of the Maryland Black Republicans and one of those guys? Because Steve's out of his element on this one. Honestly, he is. But anyway, you can listen to his comments. But yeah, I totally discount him.
First of all, he wasn't a public official when he was building the tower, and I would suggest you bringing jobs to
He wasn't what?
He was not a public official when he was building the tower. He was a private individual.
Yeah, but he was a business leader, and business leaders in Chicago have been trying to deal with this. And so my point is, if you care about the issue, do you not also care about the issue as a private citizen as opposed to waiting before you become a public official?
Well, first, the best thing you can do as a private citizen for Chicago is to create jobs and provide opportunity. But it's not like he lives in Chicago and he's a member of that community. He lives in New York. So I think we need to be fair.
But here's the deal. When you do business in the city, you are part of the community.
Well, he does business in dozens and dozens and dozens of cities across the country. So, look, the greater issue is we're talking about Reverend Scott. Reverend Scott's not a member of the Trump administration. That was the Office of Public Liaison bringing in contacts they had in the African American community to talk about Black History Month, and the guy shot his mouth off. Let's just say
One second. I've interviewed Pastor Darryl Scott several times. He says he's a longtime friend of Donald Trump. He was very active in the campaign. He was one of his high-profile surrogates. He also coordinated the meeting with Jim Brown and Ray Lewis with the Trump transition team before the inauguration. So this is not some guy who's new to the Trump orbit.
Yeah, but to be fair, he has not been invited into the Trump administration. He has no official role, as far as I know, in the Trump administration.
Invited in for Black History.
Greg Carr.
Come on, yes, sir. I would just say,
Greg Carr.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I would say very quickly, this Donald Trump, this is evidence again of Donald Trump, the chaos theory of problem solving. You have a photo op, you solve the problem. What was interesting to me was his response. When Scott, trying to sound like a policy wonk and sounding rather foolish, said what he said, what did Trump say? Well, tell him to get it together, we're coming in. What? In other words, that was the most disrespectful moment in that exchange. What do we really see here? We're looking at a man who should not be in government, a man who is clearly unstable, and he had his little Negro soiree, as Dr. Malvo said, and in the wake of that, what have we seen? This has been the most relevant 10-minute conversation about the problem, which really gives us, I think, a key to the solution. If Trump is going to continue, and there's all evidence that he will, of having these chaos theory meetings with his handful of Negro friends, it will at least elevate the issue to the point where we can come in now, beginning with conversations like this, and put that thing front and center. And at that point, you become like Monroe Trotter challenging Woodrow Wilson. In his White House, you become like Frederick Douglass challenging Lincoln, or Martin Luther King with Johnson. You shift the dialogue by refusing to pay homage to this chaos theory approach.
You know, this shows the efficacy of Omarosa.
All right, so yeah, I was going to add something else to it, but I absolutely am trying to keep the length of these videos down. But bottom line is, cocaine sniffer Scott basically lied, and it's just another example of all of these Trump either officials or surrogates or affiliated personas coming in, and the truth ain't in them. And this man's a pastor. He's supposed to be a man of God, and the truth just is not in him. This is a black issue. So where is Paris Denard and that other head of the Maryland Black Republicans and one of those guys? Because Steve's out of his element on this one. Honestly, he is. But anyway, you can listen to his comments. But yeah, I totally discount him.
First of all, he wasn't a public official when he was building the tower, and I would suggest you bringing jobs to
He wasn't what?
He was not a public official when he was building the tower. He was a private individual.
Yeah, but he was a business leader, and business leaders in Chicago have been trying to deal with this. And so my point is, if you care about the issue, do you not also care about the issue as a private citizen, as opposed to waiting before you become a public official?
Well, first, the best thing you can do as a private citizen for Chicago is to create jobs and provide opportunity. But it's not like he lives in Chicago and he's a member of that community. He lives in New York. So I think we need to be fair.
But here's the deal. When you do business in the city, you are part of the community.
Well, he does business in dozens and dozens and dozens of cities across the country. So, look, the greater issue is we're talking about Reverend Scott. Reverend Scott's not a member of the Trump administration. That was the Office of Public Liaison bringing in contacts they had in the African American community to talk about Black History Month, and the guy shot his mouth off. Let's just say
One second. I've interviewed Pastor Darryl Scott several times. He says he's a longtime friend of Donald Trump. He was very active in the campaign. He was one of his high-profile surrogates. He also coordinated the meeting with Jim Brown and Ray Lewis with the Trump transition team before the inauguration. So this is not some guy who's new to the Trump orbit.
Yeah, but to be fair, he has not been invited into the Trump administration. He has no official role, as far as I know, in the Trump administration.
Invited in for Black History.
Great car.
Come on, yes, sir. I would just say,
great car.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I would say very quickly, Donald Trump, this is evidence again of Donald Trump, the chaos theory of problem solving. You have a photo op, you solve the problem. What was interesting to me was his response. When Scott, trying to sound like a policy wonk and sounding rather foolish, said what he said, what did Trump say? Well, tell him to get it together or we're coming in. What? In other words, that was the most disrespectful moment in that exchange. What do we really see here? We're looking at a man who should not be in government, a man who is clearly unstable, and he had his little Negro soiree, as Dr. Malveaux said, and in the wake of that, what have we seen? This has been the most relevant 10-minute conversation about the problem, which really gives us, I think, a key to the solution. If Trump is going to continue, and there's all evidence that he will, of having these chaos theory meetings with his handful of Negro friends, it will at least elevate the issue to the point where we can come in now, beginning with conversations like this, and put that thing front and center. And at that point, you become like Monroe Trotter challenging Woodrow Wilson. In his White House, you become like Frederick Douglass challenging Lincoln, or Martin Luther King with Johnson. You shift the dialogue by refusing to pay homage to this chaos theory approach.
You know, this shows the efficacy of Omarosa.
All right, so yeah, I was going to add something else to it, but I absolutely am trying to keep the length of these videos down. But bottom line is, cocaine sniffer Scott basically lied, and it's just another example of all of these Trump either officials or surrogates or affiliated personas coming in, and the truth ain't in them. And this man's a pastor. He's supposed to be a man of God, and the truth just is not in him.